Hey guys, you're listening to the Energy of the Untamed Heart podcast, where we talk about uncaging your divinely gifted wild heart to be as free and expansive as you were born to be. My goal is to use our stories, guest interviews, and your questions to tease out what has been keeping your wild heart under wraps. I'm your host, Mielle Fox, and together we will shatter the myths of our old stories to set our wild heart free. So thanks for choosing you and showing up today. My guest today is Mary Mason, and I'm excited to have a chat with her. She is a leadership coach, but specifically to help out women who probably spend a lot of time away from home, but still want to check all the boxes, be all the things, have the fulfilled life, and show up professionally in their career. This hits home for me. For those of you who know me, when I'm not podcasting, when I'm not running a farm, when I'm not doing numerology, when I'm not talking about energy and coming home to your heart and all the things, I work a full-time job in the oral healthcare field, and I've done that for 35 years. So backing that up, when I was a little girl, and I'm a little bit older than Mary Mason, so she's a sweet little young thing. She could be my kid, really. But in my day, the way to get ahead, the way to get out from under, the way to express yourself as an individual didn't really come from who you really are and what is meaningful to you. It was go to college, get a degree, get a job, crank it out, do the thing, multiple decades. And oftentimes for me, it was a decision of, do I marry and have family, or do I dedicate myself to my career now that I'm in debt up to my eyeballs? And what do I do? So back in my day, it wasn't necessarily an and conversation. You could have both. It was an or conversation. And so I really am excited to have this conversation today with Mary Mason, because she actually has found that balance between both. And that is what she brings forward for her clients. And we're just going to dig in. So without further ado, Mary Mason, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. So, and this is an audio presentation, so the folks who don't see you visually, I can just say you're cute as a button. You
Thank
literally
you.
are young enough to be my kid.
I don't know if that's
Um,
true, Neil. I'm almost 40.
oh, honey girl.
Well, then you
I'm
look
I'm
as
pushing 62, my friend. But thank
okay,
you.
at a
That's
very
very
young
sweet.
age, you could have been
I
my
could have been a young mama, right? So,
yes.
but it's so interesting because I went the career path as a young adult. My parents came to this country from shortly after the war. Yeah, I know you're going, what war would that be? World War II. They had their children later in life. It was very much the stereotypical American dream of mom stays home with the kids, dad goes out as the breadwinner. And then that sort of got mixed into the turmoil of where it was now accepted that if you didn't continue in your marriage, it was more publicly acceptable to divorce and move on, create new lives. But when my folks first came to this country, that was like literally taboo. Like you sucked it up no matter what. And so, what I will say is the lesson that I was sort of fed or handed to me growing up was, if you want to get anywhere in life, you need to have a skill set, you need to have a career. And the conversation of there's a way to balance that with having family, if that's what you desire, that wasn't conversation back then. And so I know that you made a shift from corporate to entrepreneurship. And as we all know, it usually takes some major event that makes us make the change. So if you'd be so sweet as to kind of give us a little background, what brought you to how you choose to show up in the world for your clients now? How did this happen from then to now?
Yeah. Thank you for asking. And thank you for sharing that too about your own background and story. Well, kind of to your point, I grew up, my mom actually was the primary earner for our family. And actually, so was my grandmother, and so was my great grandmother. So I'm coming from a long line of women, like that's what my reality has been growing up. So that's just interesting, I think, to know about me, is that sort of built into who I am. But yeah, I was a high achiever, always have been. And so after college, I started my career as a teacher. I worked for Teach for America. So it's a nonprofit where you serve students in under-resourced areas. And so I quickly got interested in the systems and the leadership behind education and how that impacted students. And that took me into education nonprofit. I worked my way up to leading a large team there, and then shifted over to another education nonprofit startup where I quickly worked my way up to leading the organization with two other women. So it wasn't corporate, but it was an executive position in an education nonprofit. And, the team was amazing. We built this incredible organization that we grew over 7 years. We hired incredible team members. We quadrupled in size. We had secured our first really big investment. And I had a little tingling in my mind when that was happening where I wasn't happy. I was sort of like, this is all I've been working towards, but something's missing. Then came the pandemic. So I had a toddler at home full time because schools were closed. And then I had a newborn very shortly after the pandemic started. So my husband and I were both working full-time jobs with two children at home. And then, of course, just all of the unknown and the stress. It was just a really stressful time. And that was actually when our organization was growing rapidly. And so there was just a lot going on for me personally. And maybe a year into the pandemic, one of my partners, who also is now one of my dearest friends, said to me, "Hey, I think I'm going to start looking for new jobs in about 6 months." And that was a real light switch moment for me. I feel like I came to and was like, wait a second, we can do that? Like, we can just leave? It just had never crossed my mind. I was so deep in it, in just putting one foot in front of another and moving forward. And so I started to look for some jobs just to see what was out there. I found what should have been a dream job for me, and I could not open the application. My body physically would not let me open the job application. That had never happened to me before. I was used to telling my body, oh, you're going to do it. So at the same time, and again, I hadn't put all these pieces together, but at the same time, I also was struggling with migraines, grinding my teeth at night. I had given myself stress-induced vertigo. But again, I just kept thinking to myself, well, it's just my body doing funny stuff. I wasn't putting all the pieces together, which sounds so silly now. So I was having a conversation with my therapist. I have a wonderful therapist. And she said to me, have you ever considered just taking a break? And again, another light bulb moment for me that had never crossed my mind. Just never crossed my mind to stop and take a break. Again, I was, sorry, I'm banging stuff around. I was the primary earner for my family and had been for some time. And work was such a core part of my identity of being a leader of this organization, being in charge. And so that really baffled me. I thought to myself, So I sat down with my husband. And at this point, I had really reached sort of a real burnout phase. I was crying almost every day, having a hard time functioning. And so we looked at our finances and moved some things around, cut some things out, and decided I could take a few months off of work. And so I did. And in that time, it was just this beautiful experience of healing and realizing how burnt out I was, and realizing that my body had been trying to tell me for a while that I wasn't doing great. And so I took time to rest and go for walks and tap back into my creative self that used to be a big part of my life and just wasn't anymore. So I started painting and writing. And then at this time, I also realized I'd always wanted to become a coach, but I never had time to take on something else. And so I decided to get my coaching certification. So I did that. And yeah, now I started this amazing business. I think because I realized at the time there are so many women like me, high achieving women who are just so deep in it that they can't pull out and look around and realize I have a choice. I don't have to live like this. It is possible to have a job and work that brings me energy and lights me up. I think that's what I ultimately realized is it wasn't the job. We had actually built a great organization, really focused on people. The systems and structures were there. It was me. I hadn't set boundaries for myself. I also wasn't living my purpose. Now I get to do coaching that doesn't even feel like work. And so that was a long explanation of how I got to where I am today.
Not at all. And you brought up so many points in your story here that I really kind of want to visit. Because I think as we're having this conversation, there are probably many, many, many women of all ages, I will say, including myself. You know, I'm towards the end of my current day career in the next whatever number of years that may be. Not terribly long, because I'm in my 60s. But the transition of how did I think I needed to move through the world? How did I identify and justify who I was based on what I did in the world? That has radically altered and changed for me from my 20s to 60s. So, 4 decades, let's call it that. But there's an enormous shift that occurs, I think, for both men and women. But we're going to hone in on the professional gals because, like you, type A, high achiever, overachiever, whatever you want to call that, part of the way that I move through the world is I'm very curious. I like to do different things. If I'm going to do something, I was also pretty much told the adage in the story of if you're going to do it to maximum capacity. Like, don't half-ass it. Like, do it or don't do it. And that's great because it is the integrity piece of if you're going to give of yourself, give well. Don't go into it if you don't really have your heart in it. But the flip side or the mirror of that adage is also a pressure point. It's a pressure point that we put on ourselves where we now fall into this complete baloney of is it perfect? Is it right? Am I enough? Am I worthy? Am I doing the thing? If I don't work at a work all day long and really show up and do it, all happy, what does that really mean? And so when we dig through your story, I hear you saying these pieces, which is one, I didn't realize that somatically my body was taking all of these call them slight misalignments of how were you moving through the world because there wasn't a balance point. There were no boundaries. It was completely externally shifted everything without any the self involved. And sooner or later, that's a burnout. You can only empty your gas tank so much for you're running on fumes. End of story. And we call that adrenal fatigue. And it shows up in lots of ways in your body. It shows up, as you said, constant crying and depression, anxiety, migraines, vertigo. All of these things are basically physical presentations of your nervous system being completely derailed. So when you chose to take your time off, which kudos to you, there are many women who are like, oh, I couldn't possibly, including myself, I will say, for me to actually. I this is going to sound a little out there, but I do it now. I schedule my downtime for myself. I literally put time into my calendar. I'm like, yeah, there will be no phone calls. There will be no Zooms. There will be no nothing. That is me time. It is for me to do whatever. Take a walk in the woods, play with the dog, go out with the horses, whatever, read a book, work on needlepoint. I don't know, whatever the thing is, cook cookies, eat cookies. That concept of it's okay to nurture the deepest part of yourself, and that is part of what's on the podcast. Why do I do the podcast? This message of one, understanding the need for both rest and activity. You can't have one and not the other. You need a little bit of both. This concept that how are you identifying who you are? Are you identifying through what you do, how how you show up? Are you identifying with what speaks to you when you say, now what I do for women and I coach doesn't feel like a job? Hello. That is because it aligns to your deepest place within you. And so these are really interesting topics to explore. I am sure you have a range of clients, all ages and all different kinds of career paths, who struggle with, well, if I take time off, if I choose to have a baby, if I whatever, don't go to the office from this time and that time, or if I call in sick, God forbid, because my head's gonna pop off my neck. Am I not good enough? Am I not doing enough? What will I be perceived as? And that thread of thoughts, I think, is an ultimate derailer for happiness, for health, for joy, for growth.
Yes, I could not agree more. A lot of I mostly work with women, not only, but that's typically who finds me. Most of the women that come to me, I ask them in one of our first sessions, I say, what are your 10 lifetime wants? What are 10 things that you want out of life? And what are 10 things you're just tolerating? And it's been so interesting. So many of them have a very hard time answering that question. What are they tolerating? Because partly I think we're made to feel like we should just be grateful for what we've got and happy that we can have all of these things or have this job and have a family and have all this stuff, but not actually taking the time to sit, be quiet all the external noise and think, what doesn't actually feel quite right? And I think it's connecting back to what you were saying about scheduling downtime. Same. I schedule it for myself now. In fact, I actually don't work on Mondays or Fridays because those are my days. And I also never take more than 2 meetings a day, whereas I used to be having 10 meetings back to back a day in my old job. But having that downtime where we are not taking on too much input, we're just constantly getting input. So actually taking some downtime to go for a walk in the woods, to sit outside quietly, to meditate, to whatever the thing is that allows some of the external noise to quiet down, to really tap back into who we are at our core. Just right now, so many of us aren't allowing ourselves that time. And so we're missing that information and it's hard for us to access it.
So let me ask you this, because this is also really interesting to me. There are people who really struggle if they don't fill the schedule. In other words, you and I are saying almost like with excitement and glee and giddiness, like, ooh, can't wait for that downtime in my schedule where I can just do what I want, because we understand and really hold dear the value of what does that mean to re-regulate our nervous system, to become more grounded, to really connect, to shut down some of this ongoing day-to-day chatter that is it is just part of what occurs if you work in any number of fields outside of and even if you're an entrepreneur, you actually have to, it's no different. You're just not going outside to a brick and mortar location, basically, for most entrepreneurs. But that same level of, do you let your mind get away with everything? That's still present. But I also am curious how you help your clients navigate the clients who almost are afraid to have the downtime, almost not because they're going to be judged necessarily, like, oh, look, she's taking 2 hours out of her work week, oh my god. But I have come across women and men, but mostly women, who they don't know what to do with themselves if they're not busy. So in other words, they're uncomfortable with the space that is created when you actually have to look inside and maybe get curious about yourself, like, oh, I wonder why I think this, or I wonder why I fill my time with XYZ. So there's a difference between, do you fill your time with activities or space to quote unquote rest and kind of recover and rejuvenate and get your cup refilled, versus the people who fill their time because they don't want to or are afraid of looking within. Do you see that as you go through your intake with your clients?
Yeah, definitely. I think most of the people who are coming to me are self-selecting in some way or another, but saying, I'm not good at this. but I want to be better, or I don't know why I can't just relax or rest or work less. And so actually over the past few years, I've created a method that it helps people understand some of this. And so it's called the empowered balance method. And there's 3 categories that we focus on. The first one is purposeful vision. So that allows people to get clarity of how did you get to where you are today? What are your values? What's important to you? And then where do you want to be in 10 years? Sometimes it's easier to think 10 years from now versus 6 months from now. So in 10 years, what do you want to be true for your life? It's a future blueprint, is what we call it. So that builds sort of the clarity for people. Then we move to the belief breakthrough. That's the next section. That helps people build the confidence. So we start working through the limiting mindsets. What are the stories we're telling ourselves? I couldn't possibly rest because then I wouldn't be valuable, or I'm not enough, so I need to just keep moving. Whatever, we all have those stories that we tell ourselves. We work through those. We also spend time digging into the zone of genius. And that's what is your unique gift that you bring to the world, where it doesn't feel like work. You would do it for free. And that's a very fun conversation that a lot of people haven't spent time thinking about. And then we move to the embodied action, and that's to build the energy. So now you've got this vision, you're building this confidence. How do you actually make moves? How do you make something happen? And that's where we talk a lot about boundaries. We talk about the somatic component. So, for example, I had a client and she was, sort of struggling with the same thing of like, well, on the weekends, I just have to do housework. And we worked through actually having her ask her body on a Saturday afternoon, what do you need right now? And listening to it. And so she came back the next session and said, it told me I wanted to take a nap. And so I did. I haven't taken a nap in 20 years. And now she's a regular Saturday napper. When her toddler naps, she naps. But that had never been accessible to her before because she had all these thoughts. And that seems really small, but for her, that was a big step in listening to her body, listening to her boundaries. And then we were able to translate that into many other areas of her life at work and at home. And so ultimately, the goal of this whole framework, of the empowered balance framework, is to work less so that you can succeed more. So actually do less, but just do the things that are important to you, that are aligned with your values, and we can let go of the other stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I love the way that you've described this framework. And before we hit the record button, you and I had a little conversation because you had sort of trolled over on my current needs to be upgraded website. But a lot of what I do in just different words, different explanation, is to help people by using what I choose to share with them about what I know of the energy moving through the world, through our body, through our mind, through our heart, through our choice of whatever spirituality, meaning beyond 3D, beyond Earth, all those things. I happen to choose to do that through the use of numerology and a few other goodies. But long story short, the end point is very similar. It is, how do we take the information that we have available and know to shine the light on what is your uniquely designated, design coded, whatever you want to call it, gift, how you're really here to show up. Because again, anybody who's listened to any of my podcasts knows that I truly believe we're hanging out here on earth. We're a soul in a human body. We are all different, and there's a reason we're all different, because we all have a different way to come through with our own unique gift so that we can then uplift the whole gang together. So if everybody was the same, it probably wouldn't be as potentiated and successful. But the fact that we all come at it with just a little tiny different tweak is the beauty of it. It is the thing that makes it stronger. It's the scaffolding that builds the skyscraper, so to speak. And it's really the way you've described the steps for your program. It's very interesting because it's very much aligned with what we call the divine timing cycle. And there are stages and steps within that which are really critical. Like, you don't know what you don't know till you do. Translation, until one has an awareness that, oh gosh, oh, you mean I actually have a choice? Are you kidding? Like, until you break through with, oh my goodness, I have this awareness of the thing, it's difficult to get to the next step, which is one, oh, let me get curious about what it might look like, translation, visionary. Next, can I have the accountability and the self-responsibility to say, oh, guess what? It's on me to make a decision and a choice to move this forward. The letting go of the stories. I mean, it amazes me how much as adults we decide we have to hold on to things that really it's time to set them down. It's time to say, thank you. It was so great you were there when I needed you, when I was 3, when I was 5, when I was 7. But guess what? At 60, not so much. It's okay to set it down. And so I think for people in our area of sharing and teaching and coaching and mentoring, we come at it a little differently. The ultimate destination for our clients is very similar. It's just different pathways. But for women who have historically felt like, I got to do it all, you are absolutely the lighthouse to show, hey, listen, you can still have it all, but you don't need to fall apart while you're doing it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. And you and I'd love to just learn more too about numerology and the way you approach it, because it sounds like we're so aligned. But yeah, it's like, I think ultimately it's all about choices. So you can't have it all, but you can have all the things that are most important to you. You just have to figure out what those things are. And then, yeah, you might have to make some hard choices. But when you're living in that aligned state, oh gosh, it's so freeing and joyful. And it doesn't mean there aren't hard times, but the energy, to your point about energy, the energy is just different. And that is,
Mhm.
I want, and that's the joy I get from helping women find that place and be in that space of freedom and joy and alignment. And you said something else that was interesting to me. Oh, about finding your unique gift. I'd love to know how you approach it. One of the ways I talk to people about it. So the term is zone of genius. That was coined by Gay Hendricks. He wrote the book, The Big Leap, which is excellent. I recommend it to all of my clients. He's a psychologist and an author, and now he has an institute. But there's 4 different zones we all inhabit. There's a zone of incompetence. We don't really know how to do something, like me with technology. There's a zone of competence where you can learn to do something, but a lot of people know how to do it. There's your zone of excellence where you've learned a skill and you're very good at it. And usually you can make a lot of money doing that skill. But for many people, maybe it feels like something's missing. So for me, I was an amazing consultant, but it didn't light me up. And then the final zone is the zone of genius. And that's where you're in flow, where work doesn't feel like work, where it brings you energy instead of takes energy away. And often when I'm talking with clients, I have to say, it's often something you are naturally good at. So let's go back to when you were a kid. What did
Mhm.
you love doing when you were a kid? What lit you up as a kid, as a teenager, before we all got socialized to say, like, well, those are just dreams and let's follow the career path. And it's such a fun conversation to have with people to tap into. And then we can start unraveling all of that to then figure out, how does that translate to grown up life and to a job, and how you might incorporate that into your day-to-day life.
Yeah. So these are really like, if I could just sit here with a clipboard and go 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, these points that we're just casually talking about are so key. The curiosity, the childlike curiosity. When you watch your toddler go explore in the woods or go to the playground with their new little friends or whatever it is, they're not worried about how they're being perceived. They're just out there having themselves a good old time. They're just doing the thing. And again, as adults, we have a lot of extra programming that gets layered on for good, for bad, or otherwise, that takes away a lot of that innocence of childlike curiosity. And so we do hear that terminology a lot, like, can we tap back into what it was like when we were, 3, 4, 5, which as you get older gets a little harder to tap back, but it can be done. I will tell you it can be done. So that's very interesting to me, is that openness and curiosity that we see with young kids. That's absolutely the truth. And I think that is a key to finding what you refer to as the zone of genius. And it's very interesting that I would say what's so helpful to have a mentor coach like yourself with someone who is seeking a different direction is, and I will say this transparently myself, even though, you and I are kind of in similar types of fields. If somebody says, "What's your zone of genius?" I got to be honest, until recently, I would look at them blankly and say, I don't know. I don't know. Because, and I don't mean to say this like egotistically, toot my own horn. I have a lot of things I'm pretty dang good at. I have a lot of things I have a pretty good skill level with. I'm really good at my day job. It's not exactly like takes up 24/7 of everything I want to do, but I'm good at it. I do receive fulfillment from it, but it isn't my only source of fulfillment. It isn't the thing that sets my heart on fire, right? I'm good at it and I've done it for decades. But like you say I was a great consultant. I'm sure you were. I can tell by just having this conversation. But it isn't the thing that really like, woohoo, sparks me up. I have a lot of other areas that spark me up. So that's an interesting piece because it's two different questions. It's not like, hmm, it's not the what lights you up and what comes easily to you are not necessarily exactly the same thing. And I find that a really interesting conversation to have. And I think it's critical for women out there who are like, I have no idea what that is. Get yourself someone that you connect with, align with as a coach mentor, because other people see in you what you oftentimes don't see within yourself. Because what comes easily to us, we think oftentimes, well, if it comes easy to me, it must come easy to everybody. And truth be told, that is not so. So what comes very easily to me, I'm kind of like, well, duh. So I don't say that out loud, but sometimes I'm like, well, duh, that's so obvious because it moves through my being so rapidly, like as if it's breathing, like it's air, like it's so okay. Flow is the word you used, and flow is the thing that I think is so key when people talk about what lights me up.
Is a highly competent woman. Many of the women that come to me are women, and I am one of them as well, who if we put our mind to something, we can do it. We can figure it out. I mean, we can be pretty good at so many things. And so oftentimes it can be hard to identify, well, what am I really good at? Because I feel like I'm pretty good at a lot of stuff. And so actually shifting the question to your point from not necessarily what am I good at, because I'm good at a lot of things, but what gives me, where can I find flow? What lights me
Yes.
up? What feels
Yes.
easy to me? That, to your point, certainly is not necessarily easy to everybody else, though we, as we're wanting to, just assume, oh, well, if it's easy for me, yeah, it's easy for everybody, but that's not true. And
Correct.
you're so right. I had a coach. I as a good coach, I always have my own coach because I just, other, to your point, other people can see things we can't see about ourselves. And I had a great coach who said to me, "Oh, this is while I was still at my old job. Well, so you're really creative." And I said, "I don't know. I don't think so." And she was like, "Yeah, you are." And we sort of went through a conversation where I had to think back to myself as a child. And I was always painting, drawing. I was very into photography in high school and college. And that was a whole side of myself that I had just completely shut off. I honestly had almost forgotten that that was something that lit me up, this kind of creative energy and thinking. Um, and so it is so helpful to have someone else just help point those things out to you so that then you can figure out what to do with that. And
Yeah.
one of the things you said too is that we can have multiple zones of genius. You can have many things that light you up where you can find flow. And also it can change over time. And you can, set something aside and come back to it later. It doesn't have to be sort of this one black and white sort of a thing.
Yeah. I love that you say that because as multidimensional beings, why would we only have one, like one channel, one avenue, one path, one gift, one whatever one wants to call it, one zone? We're not configured that way. And I don't mean this in a wooey way. I mean literally, scientifically, we are not configured that way. It is part of the way that we are here on Earth as humans. Why we are all different? Why are we not all the same? Because that multidimensionality of our being, our personality, our expression, our creativity, all of that all serve as different exchanges of energies that add to the whole. So again, you can come at it from lots of different ways. People think there are people who think that what I choose to do through numerology is like woohoo, out on planet X. Well, for those of you who really want to get zoned in, yes, we talk about numbers, we talk about energy, but it is actually all connected to scientifically measurable things, vibrations, frequencies, the quantum, all of it. So if you really, for people who really want to get down and geeky, I'll give it to you geeky. If people kind of want it a little wooey, I'll give it to you wooey. But it's for real. I mean, believe it, don't believe it. I'm not here to convince anybody, just like you're not here to convince anybody. But the truth be told, when someone says something that rings true to you, you don't really question it. You go, oh, well, that makes sense. Oh, well, that sounds about right. So it's interesting how sometimes our mind gets in the way of our heart and our higher self because our mind, the job of our mind is to analyze, break things down, utilize our old memories, our stories. The job of our ego is there to quote unquote keep us alive and safe and survive. That's what it does. I mean, that's plain old science. And then we have the other side, which is what's going on in your heart space. Why is the connection of head and heart resonance set up the way it is? Because one has a bigger electromagnetic field than the other. And I don't want to burst everybody's bubble, but it is in your head. Just saying. So, I mean, when you really pare it all down, it's really not as ethereally woo-y as people believe it to be. And we come to this with just a different descriptor of the thing. And at the end of the day, it's how do you move through this world in flow state? How do you move through this world in things that don't feel scratchy to your being, that feel comfortable and aligned and peaceful and resonate? That's really all it is. And we make it so much harder than it needs to be. We really do.
So cute.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had
So,
a different coach one time say to me, it sounds like you don't think you deserve a life of ease. And that hit me. And again, this was when I was at my old job, but she was right.
mhm,
I had a story that it was all supposed to be hard. If it was
mhm.
worth doing, it should be hard. And I'm so glad I let go of that story and unlearned that, because ease doesn't mean it's easy, but it has ease to it. It feels nice. Doesn't mean I'm not working hard, but it feels good.
Mhm.
Um, and something you said too that really resonated with me, this idea of being multidimensional. I can't tell you how many women I talked to, and I was one of those people. If somebody asked me what my hobbies were, I would be like, what a rude question to ask. I work. Okay. And I'm a mom. I have two young children. I don't have time for hobbies. But now I realize, pulling myself out of that place, building this career, structuring it in a way that fits me and my energy, I can be a multidimensional being who does have hobbies. And so I talk with women a lot about we've often centered work. Work has been our center. And actually, we have the opportunity to build a rich, whole life where work is a piece of it. It's a fulfilling piece of this bigger puzzle, but we also can have lots of other things in there that light us up, that bring us joy, that fulfill us. And that's a real, I think, American way of thinking about work is everything. And so there is a lot of unlearning that we have to do, but it's so wonderful to get to be a part of that process with somebody and watching them unlearn it and think about their energy and their body. And we do a little woo woo stuff too, which I love. I'm fully on board. And so it's just a really beautiful experience.
Yeah, there's room for all of it. There's no right, no wrong. There's no it has to be like this or like that. That's the beauty of all of it. It can look so many different ways for whatever it is somebody desires. And I really appreciate that you say ease is not necessarily easy, but ease feels in flow, feels aligned, feels good. Because at the end of the day, that's really, really the ticket. So for folks who want more Mary Mason, how do they get more Mary Mason? How do they get tapped into your program, which I think is phenomenal?
Yes. So if people want to work with me, I take on a limited number of clients because, again, I am living my own life in this very balanced way. So I take 6 clients a quarter. So if people want to work one-on-one with me, they can on my website. It's Mary Mason Boaz, BOAZ.com. And and if you're not sure and you just want to chat, you can have a free consultation. And I try to make those really valuable. So it's essentially a free coaching conversation. And then my newsletter, I send out a newsletter a few times a month. And that's at marymasonboaz.com/subscribe. And so I don't email a ton. I'm not going to be flooding people's inboxes, but a few times a month, I send a newsletter. It's pretty funny. I try to keep it light and funny and tell stories, and while also providing just good leadership and career tips. So that's another good place to find me. And then I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So Mary Mason Boaz. And then I have an Instagram. It's Mary Mason_coaching. I'm less active there, but every once in a while I'll post some gems.
Perfect. It's perfect. I'll put all of the contact sites into the show notes for everybody. I think there are many I'll end it with this. I think there are many people in different career paths that at a very deep core level know something's not quite right. Like, gee, I'm just not quite happy. Oh, I feel so burnt out. Gee, is this all there is? There's that little inside that is speaking to them, and to give themselves permission to perhaps just investigate what might this look like if I were to consider X, Y, and Z. To have mentorship and coaching with someone like yourself, I think is a soft, kind, gentle, but yet kind of structured way to start to take the pieces apart without sort of like cracking the door open versus like whipping it open. I mean, it's a nice, gentle way to say, value your professionalism, value that you're out there, hitting the pavement, doing the thing, but want to remind you there's more to life than just that, and here's how we can investigate it.
Yeah.
So I thank you so much. This has been such a good talk. I'm so grateful that you reached out because I just really feel there's just so many opportunities available where, quote unquote, you can have it all. You can have it all if you just decide whatever your all is, whatever all is for everybody. There's a way to do it without falling apart, without, having to be completely burnt out and the cup is empty.
Yeah.
So I thank you. I thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great
Thank you.
talk.